In today's video, we dive into a jaw-dropping encounter that exposes a serious issue: when female cops don't know the law. This isn't just about a simple misunderstanding. It's about rights being challenged and an officer's authority coming into question. Imagine being pulled over, questioned, and asked for identification you're not legally required to provide. What do you do when the officer doesn't fully understand the very law they're supposed to enforce? In this second part of our ID refusal series, we follow a tense moment where a civilian's calm defiance leads to a power struggle with law enforcement. As tensions rise, the officer's lack of legal knowledge becomes painfully clear, and the situation spirals. Will the officer back down, or will this escalate into something bigger? Stay tuned to see how this interaction unfolds, and make sure you don't miss the next chapter of this gripping story. As the officer stands firm, the civilian calmly explains their understanding of the law. They know their rights, having done their research. They refuse to provide ID, pointing out that, according to their state's laws, they aren't required to under these circumstances. The officer hesitates, clearly unsure of how to proceed. She's been trained to handle these situations, but this case feels different, unfamiliar. You can see her mind racing, trying to remember what exactly the law says. The civilian doesn't make a scene, but there's an air of quiet defiance that makes the situation even more tense. The silence stretches as the officer debates her next move. She starts questioning, perhaps overstepping her authority, but the civilian stands their ground. At this point, there's a subtle shift. It's not just about a traffic stop anymore. It's about whether the officer will admit she's in the wrong. And if she doesn't, what happens next? The officer's grip on her radio tightens, as if seeking validation from her fellow officers or the dispatcher. You can see her wrestling with the situation, her training, her instincts, and now the mounting pressure of the civilian's calm resistance. She asks again, her voice a little less steady, whether the civilian is sure about their rights. They respond with confidence, citing specific sections of the law and even referencing legal cases that support their position. It's a battle of knowledge and authority, but right now the civilian seems to be winning. The officer glances over to her partner, who's standing off to the side, watching but not intervening. He shifts uncomfortably, clearly unsure of how to back her up. Meanwhile, the civilian remains calm, almost too calm. There's something about their demeanor that adds to the unease of the moment. Is this just someone asserting their rights, or is there something more to their response? The tension escalates as the officer steps back to consult her partner, her voice a little louder now as she tries to get her bearings. The moment feels charged, like everything is hanging on the next decision. What happens if she insists the civilian provides their ID? Will they escalate the situation further, or will the officer risk admitting she's wrong? There's a growing sense that this isn't just about a routine stop anymore. It's about how far one person is willing to go to stand up for their rights, and how far an officer is willing to go to assert her authority, even when she's unsure. The officer returns to her patrol car, her hand trembling as she reaches for her radio. Her voice crackles over the speaker, asking for clarification. Was she misinterpreting the law? The civilian watches, still composed, but with a glimmer of suspicion in their eyes. They know the officer is looking for confirmation, but the more she hesitates, the more it feels like she's losing control of the situation. Minutes pass, though it feels like an eternity. The officer's partner moves closer, his posture stiff, clearly uncomfortable. He glances over at the civilian, who hasn't budged an inch, and then to the officer, who is now on the phone, listening intently to someone at dispatch. The silence between them is deafening. The air is thick with anticipation, as if everyone knows the next move could change everything. Then, without warning, the officer's voice breaks through the tension. "I need you to step out of the vehicle." It's a direct order, but it sounds unsure, almost as if she's trying to assert authority she doesn't entirely feel. The civilian doesn't flinch. They respond with one word, their voice steady. "Why?" The officer's partner shifts nervously, his eyes darting back and forth. The decision now rests with the officer. Will she push further, or will she back down? A small crowd has begun to gather at the edge of the parking lot, watching the scene unfold. The stakes feel higher now, more public. Every second of silence builds the pressure. The officer steps forward again, her expression hardening, but even she knows this moment could spiral. The civilian's refusal isn't just about avoiding an ID check anymore. It's become a battle of wills. Just as the officer takes another step toward the civilian, the unexpected happens. The civilian pulls out their phone, tapping the screen quickly before raising it to record. "You're on camera," they say, their voice calm, but now carrying an unmistakable edge of determination. The officer freezes, her hand still hovering near her holster. The partner steps forward, instinctively trying to block the view of the camera, but it's too late. The footage is already rolling. The tension spikes as the officer quickly looks around, trying to gauge who might be watching, who might be recording. The crowd, now larger, murmurs among themselves, and some begin to pull out their own phones. The atmosphere shifts. What was once a private confrontation has now become very public. The stakes are higher than ever. "Go ahead," the civilian says with a defiant calm. "But know you're being filmed. Every word, every move." It's clear now that they're not just standing up for their rights. They're setting the stage for something bigger. The officer's partner shifts uncomfortably again. His uncertainty is palpable. The officer takes a deep breath, looking back at the crowd, then down at her radio as if seeking one last piece of direction. But nothing comes. The dispatcher's voice is a faint buzz on the other end. There's no immediate help. In that moment, it feels like everything is hanging in the balance. The officer could back off, admit she's in the wrong, and walk away from the situation. Or she could make a move that could escalate things in a way neither side is prepared for. The clock is ticking, and with every passing second, the pressure mounts. The civilian's phone continues to record, and in the background, the onlookers watch, their phones raised as well. What will the officer do next? The audience knows the turning point is near, but the outcome is still uncertain. The officer stands frozen for a long moment, eyes darting between the phone camera and her partner, whose face has gone pale. The crowd is growing louder, murmuring amongst themselves, the tension rising with each passing second. The officer's training kicks in, and she steps forward once more, this time with more certainty. "Step out of the vehicle now," she commands, her voice shaking but authoritative. The civilian, however, remains seated, holding up the phone, unwavering. "You're making a mistake," the civilian says calmly, their eyes locked on hers. "You know I don't have to. You're violating my rights." The officer hesitates, her hand twitching near her holster again, but this time it's different. She looks around at the crowd, realizing the weight of the moment. The situation isn't just about her or the civilian anymore. It's about public perception. It's about power, authority, and accountability. But what happens if she backs down now? A voice crackles through her radio, interrupting the tension. "Stop the confrontation. You're being watched. Let it go." It's not from her dispatcher. It's a higher command. She falters, looking over at her partner, who nods slightly, almost in relief. With a deep breath, the officer steps back. "You're free to go," she mutters under her breath, the words feeling heavier than they should. The civilian, however, doesn't move. Instead, they lower the camera, turning it toward the officer's badge, capturing the moment. Then as the officer and her partner walk back to their car, the civilian's voice rings out. But there's something else you should know. The crowd quiets, waiting for the next twist. The civilian points toward a different car parked nearby, a plain sit-in. From it steps another officer, someone the crowd recognizes as a supervisor from the local precinct. The twist. The supervisor's cold smile tells a story of its own. "I've been watching this whole time," the supervisor says, walking up to the first officer. "And I think you both need some serious retraining, especially on understanding the law." The camera clicks off, leaving everyone in stunned silence. The officer's failure to handle the situation correctly had been set up from the start. The supervisor knew it would happen. The real question now, was it a test of competence or something much deeper? As the supervisor steps forward, the crowd watches in stunned silence, processing what just happened. The first officer lowers her head, realizing she's been caught in a moment of weakness. The supervisor's words hang in the air, not just as a reprimand, but as a reflection of the larger issue. How many other officers might be misinformed? How often these situations go unnoticed? And the consequences of ignoring the law they're sworn to uphold. The civilian, finally stepping out of the car, takes one last look at the officers before walking away, their point made. The tension that had gripped the scene dissolves, but the message is clear. Knowledge of the law isn't just important, it's essential. As the officers drive off, their silence speaks volumes. This wasn't just an isolated incident, it's a wake-up call for law enforcement and citizens alike. Always know your rights. Always stay informed. Because you never know when the law itself might be the one that's tested.